Welcome to my channel. History of Crusades and Salahuddin Ayyubi. The Crusades have emerged as one of the most active fields of historical study over the past 40 years, indicating a growing desire to comprehend and interpret these unique events. Western Europe had grown into a great power by the end of the 11th century, but still being behind the other civilizations in the Mediterranean region. It was made up of a number of kingdoms that may be characterized as feudal. While persistent private conflict, brigandage, and issues with vassalage and inheritance persisted, other monarchies were already constructing more cohesive political structures. The impacts of population increase, which started at the end of the 10th century and persisted far into the 13th, were being felt in Europe at the same time. The First Crusade, 1096 to 1099. Four Crusader armies, led by Raymond of St. Gilles, Godfrey of Bouillon, Hugh of Vermandois, and Bohemond of Taranto, together with his nephew Tancred, were assembled from warriors from various Western European regions. In August 1096, several groups set off for Byzantium. Under the leadership of a well-liked preacher known as Peter the Hermit, a less structured army of knights and commoners known as the People's Crusade departed ahead of the others. In 1096, a second group of crusaders led by the legendary Count Emicho massacred a number of Jews in several Rhineland cities, sparking widespread outrage and a serious crisis in relations between Jews and Christians. The powerful walled city of Nicaea, 120 miles from Constantinople, was taken by the Crusaders and the Greeks in June 1097, but some sources noted Frankish unhappiness with the distribution of spoils following the conquest. Crossing the Anatolian plain, the Crusaders advanced the interior. Near Dorylaeum, the forces of Bohemond of Taranto were attacked by a sizable Turkish army. Following the victory, a large number of the worn-out Christians died from illness, including Adhemar of Le Puy, the papal legate and spiritual coordinator of the battle. There was a sharp rift among the top Crusaders. Bohemond wished to remain and strengthen his control over Antioch, claiming that since Alexios had broken his word to the Greeks, his oath was null and void and the conquest was still his. However, during the course of the following decade, the Christians started to seize control of the entire coastline and establish a number of functional governments, helped by the absence of genuine resistance from the local Muslims and bolstered by the arrival of a number of fleets from the west. It was essential to have the assistance of the Italian trading centers of Venice, Pisa, and, notably in this early period, Genoa. Although the Italians' motivations have frequently been questioned, there is compelling evidence that they shared the same desire to conquer Jerusalem as their contemporaries and were equally committed to promoting the interests of their own commercial centers. The effects of religion. The Crusades contributed to the growth of popular religion in Europe, especially in Western Europe. During the period, religion had a profound social impact since it was inspired by stories of signs and wonders and believed that natural calamities were caused by supernatural intervention. Meanwhile, reform activities did not go unnoticed by laypeople, who occasionally protested clergy they felt were unworthy. It may seem contradictory that a council would simultaneously declare peace and authorize war, but the peace movement was created to defend the weak, and a key component of the crusade was the desire to aid fellow Christians in the East. This thought was closely related to the view that going to war to defend Christendom was not only a righteous course of action, but also a holy deed, therefore pleasing to God. Another common religious activity, visiting a sacred shrine, was closely related to this Western idea of holy war. Local shrines housing saints' relics abound in 11th century Europe, but three major centers of pilgrimage stand out above the rest: Rome, home to the tombs of Saints Peter and Paul; Santiago de Compostela in northwest Spain; and Jerusalem, where Jesus Christ is interred in the Holy Sepulchre. Even though pilgrimage had always been seen as a kind of devotion, it had grown to be seen as a more formal atonement for grave sin. In some cases, the confessor would even order it as a penance for the culprit. Bishops from southern France made up the majority of the attendees at the Council of Clermont, which Urban called on November 18, 1095. A small number of people from other parts of France and beyond also participated. A number of significant canons were created as a result of the vital ecclesiastical business that was conducted, including one that re-established the peace of God and another that offered a plenary indulgence, the forgiveness of all penance for sin, to anyone who committed to assisting Christians in the East. Then the Pope, a Frenchman, addressed a sizable gathering in a massive outdoor assembly. Three important developments coincided during the Clermont era. First, there was a popular religious fervor like never before. with clear eschatological tendencies and the holy city of Jerusalem playing a prominent role. Second, the war against the infidel had come to be regarded as a religious undertaking, a work pleasing to God. And third, Western Europe now had the ecclesiastical and secular institutional and organizational capacity to wage war against the infidel. Preparations for the Crusade. After Pope Urban's address, both the East and the West started making preparations. Emperor Alexius, who had probably expected to mobilize some type of auxiliary force, reportedly quickly understood that he would need to support and oversee a far bigger stream of fighters. The people who accepted the cross in the West strove to raise money, frequently by selling or mortgaging land, while the commanders started to organize their armies, both for the immediate purchase of equipment and for the long-term necessities of the journey. Alexius had a significant challenge because of the deployment of large armed troops close to Constantinople, estimated to number 4,000 mounted knights and 25,000 infantry. There was also periodic disturbance. The emperor forced each crusade leader to make an oath promising to return to him any conquered territory that had belonged to the empire before the Turkish invasions and to swear loyalty to him while the Crusaders were in his domain. It soon became clear that the emperor's interests were different from the goal of the Crusaders. From Constantinople to Antioch, Nicaea, the Turkish Sultanate's capital, was captured by the Byzantines on June 19 when the Crusaders and a group of Byzantine soldiers arrived there late in May 1097. On June 26, the Crusade army departed Nicaea for Antioch but found it challenging to cross the parched and mountainous Anatolia. On July 1, 1097, Turks attacked the Crusader army's advance column at Dorylaeum. Bohemond, on the other hand, suggested that, if the emperor did not show, whoever entered the city first should take ownership of it. In fact, the Norman had already made contact with a disgruntled commander inside, who on June 3, 1098, allowed him to cross a section of the fortifications. Bohemond was followed by the other Crusaders into the sleeping city, where they swiftly took it. Only the citadel persevered. The siege of Jerusalem. The Fatimid caliphs of Cairo, who were Shia Muslims and rivals of the Sunni Seljuks and the caliphs of Baghdad, were located not far from Beirut when the army invaded their area. The Fatimids had conquered Jerusalem by August 1098. Therefore, rather than the Seljuks, the Egyptian Fatimids were the target of the First Crusade's final offensive. On July 13-14, siege towers were brought up to the walls. On July 15, Godfrey's troops took a section of the walls, and other soldiers followed on climbing ladders. Tancred and Raymond entered when the nearest gate was opened, and the Muslim ruler in the Tower of David submitted to the latter. Thus, 3 arduous years after they began their journey, the Crusaders succeeded in achieving the goal. This hapless, disorganized, and foolish enterprise had defied the odds to travel from Western Europe to the Middle East and had taken control of 2 of the best defended towns at the time. From a contemporary viewpoint, the likelihood of the First Crusade's success seems astounding. The source of victory for medieval men and women, however, was God, who performed several miracles for his devoted knights. This steadfast conviction served as the foundation for centuries of crusading. The Crusader states. The Crusaders were able to take control of Palestine thanks to a successful surprise attack on the Egyptian rescue force. The majority of the Crusaders returned home after fulfilling their pilgrimage vows, leaving the few who remained to deal with the challenge of governing the occupied lands. At first, there was controversy over the type of administration that should be established. Some believed that the sacred city should be governed by the church. Godfrey was chosen to serve as the interim leader and adopted the humble title of Defender of the Holy Sepulchre. Galilean fortresses had been constructed during this time, the frontier had been pushed south, and Crusader nations had developed in the north. Baldwin, the brother of Godfrey, had previously founded the county of Edessa, a vague territory that extended into the upper Euphrates region and had a population primarily made up of Armenians and Syrians. Baldwin gave his cousin Baldwin of Labourc control over the county when he left to take over as ruler of Jerusalem. Bohemond had solidified his position in Antioch because the city had not been given back to the emperor. Although there were also Syrians and Armenians living in the city, the majority of the residents were Greek. When Bohemond replaced the Greek patriarch with a Latin one, the underlying Greek-Latin tension grew. When Bohemond was taken prisoner by the Muslims in 1100, his nephew Tancred took over as regent and widened the principality's borders to incorporate the significant port of Latakia, which the Muslims had acquired from the Byzantines in 1103. However, there was a serious threat to the northern Crusader states. The Byzantines were exerting pressure on Armenia and Antioch since they had regained their power in Anatolia. Prince Raymond of Antioch was compelled to embrace imperial suzerainty by Emperor Manuel Comnenus. However, Zhang's conquest of Edessa in 1144 starkly illustrated the greater threat to both Antioch and Armenia. Recovery efforts were unsuccessful, and the northernmost Crusader state was soon conquered. In the Muslim world, Saladin continued to be held up as an example of a great ruler even if the memory of the Crusades faded, if not completely vanished, from public view. The image of hostile, aggressive Westerners seeking to conquer Muslim or Arab lands became extremely potent for Islamist and Arab nationalist leaders alike in the context of the 19th century as a result of the Europeans' invocation of the past, which built upon this pre-existing memory. Saladin, as the man who recaptured Jerusalem, stands as the man to aspire to.